A big welcome to any folks who are new to the Animal Justice Academy community. AJA is a training program, a community, and an action collective for animal advocates. If you're not already an official AJA, you can sign up for free at animaljusticeacademy.com. Oh, Ina, I didn't even give you that link to put in, but I think you know that one, animaljusticeacademy.com. And, again, for the folks that are new here, just a reminder that we encourage chat, discussion, and debate here in the AJA community. But our rules are we always need to be respectful and try to do everything in the spirit of bridge building. All of us here have far more in common than we have not in common. So it's always good to remember you're amongst friends here. Okay, let's jump into the main event, folks, because I want to pick Nate's brain big time. Ina, you know what? I know how to spotlight. I can do that for us. I'm just going to spotlight Nate here. And I am going to spotlight myself. Okay, perfect. And Nate, hello, welcome, my friend.
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to join. I was saying to Amy earlier today that I was doing this, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I've done one of those before. Say hi to everyone." So it's nice to join everyone.
Yes. Well, and everybody knows Amy Symington. She is one of our AJA instructors as well as Nate. And she has been just a wonderful support in AJA. Nate, for those that don't know you, I'm not sure who wouldn't, but let me just do the official introduction to you, okay? So they know where you're coming from. And for those of you who just joined us, I just want to welcome you again. And for those of you who are watching the replay, we have Nathaniel Erskine-Smith joining us, and Nate is a member of Parliament for Beaches, East York. He's vegan. He's been vocal in the support of improving animal protections big time. In 2016, he introduced the Modernizing Animal Protections Act, for which he was recognized as a humane legislator by us at Animal Justice, Humane Legislator of the Year. Nate's bill led to lots of big things in government legislation, including addressing animal fighting and abuse. He also seconded the bills to ban the captivity of whales and dolphins, shark finning, and cosmetic testing on animals. Nate also helped create the Liberal Animal Welfare Caucus, which is now morphed into an all-parties animal welfare caucus, and I really want to talk about that a little bit later today. And this month in Parliament, Nate introduced Bill C247, a bill to ban fur farms Canada-wide. So Nate, I don't think you get thanked enough in this business of politics, but thank you. I mean, you've been like a beacon of hope for us in the animal advocacy movement.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would say there are many colleagues of mine who care about these issues too, and not only colleagues who have been with me for some time and where we worked together. Julie DeBruzen is a really good example. We
Julie's
were elected
amazing.
together in 2015, but Leah Taylor-Roy, who was recently elected, is excellent on these issues too. But there are many that I could point to, and so we don't advance these issues unless there's more than one. And so we frankly saw great success in this last election, not only if I could be partisan and point to the Liberal platform, but there were promises to advance animal protections in the Conservative Party's platform too. And so for the first time in history, thanks to the advocacy of, say, Michelle Rempel on the Conservative side, the advocacy of myself and my Liberal colleagues in our Liberal Animal Welfare Caucus on my side, we saw these issues advanced for the first time in election platforms, which I think is incredibly significant because, as so many of you know, it can be really hard to get any oxygen at all when you're speaking to elected officials and to governments at different levels of governance. So now the question is twofold, I would say. One is, how do we advance and realize the promises that were made in this most recent election? And two, and what we can get to in talking about ending fur farming, how do we add new issues to the agenda at the same time? So we set ourselves up for future success, and when we build upon the success we've had to date.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was unheard of to have animal issues in a political platform. And then all of a sudden, this last election, everybody had it. I mean, come on, when the Conservatives have it in their platform, you've made a dent, right?
It was good. It was good to see. And I will say, in part, we now have, I wouldn't say the Liberal Party caucus has morphed in quite the same way. There are two. So we do get together in an all-party format sometimes,
Okay.
and we still get together among Liberals at some points. But I think I think we have to continue to emphasize that animal welfare issues are nonpartisan, right? Like there are Canadians who vote very differently, and they all come together around this particular issue.
Well, so, we're going to sort of open it up to lots of topics today, but the main reason we're here is we've got a bill that we want to try to push for you. And so, give us a little bit of background on why the bill banning fur farms is something you felt was really important to champion. What are the elements of this issue that you think it's important for Canadians to consider?
There are three core elements, but first let me say that it's a credit to the filmmakers, and we can get into the conversation about the coming film, but I mean, it's a credit. This was brought to me, and this is also, I think, a testament to the difference that constituents and those who are involved in advocacy can have, where this was brought to me to say, can you champion this? And I said, and at the tail end of the last parliament, I said, well, I'll put a bill together. I don't know where it will go. I don't have a slot to be debated and voted on at that point in parliament. But why don't I put a bill together? Because at least having a piece of legislation that is drafted and tabling it in the House raises awareness, and also means that it could be put in the hands of future legislators to make a difference. And you could see, by the way, when you look at C246, the Modernizing Animal Protections Act that I introduced in early 2016, that was in some ways a mishmash of efforts that previous legislators had put forward and previous legislation that had been drafted. So really critical that we have a bill. And so I worked with the legislative drafters, worked with the Library of Parliament, and importantly, and this is one of the core elements to emphasize, this is not a new issue for other countries. Other countries, and I point to the UK as one example, which I modeled the legislation on in a serious way, but the UK prohibited commercial fur farming in the year 2000, right? So Canada has, the first issue I would raise is Canada has to play catch up in advancing animal welfare when we look at other countries around the world. Now, the other two issues to emphasize, we are all here because we care about animals and because we care about treating animals with compassion and the respect that they deserve. And so that looms large when you talk about commercial fur farming. And there are any number of reports that, and others will be more familiar than me even, but there are any number of reports in Ontario and BC and elsewhere that point to the horrific conditions that these animals, mink and other animals that are commercially farmed live in. And they're filthy, they're horrid, they're cramped, and this is no way for a sentient animal to be living. And so that's first and foremost, and that should be straightforward to anyone who's looked at this issue in a serious way. But we are also living through a pandemic. And we are living through a pandemic because, in some ways, because of the risks of and reality of spillovers and zoonotic diseases that cross over from animals to humans. And when we look at the disease risk, not only in relation to a new virus, but also in relation to the threat of a mutating virus, experts have been very clear that this isn't only an animal welfare issue, this is a human health issue. And it speaks to that idea, and I hope we all carry this with us, but this is a really crucial idea for any kind of environmental, health focused or animal advocacy going forward. But this idea of a One Health approach, that animal health, human health, and environmental health, these are interconnected ideas. And we see that when we look at mink farming. And for that reason, we see BC as a provincial government that has worked to phase out fur farming. And why did they do that? Not on the basis of animal welfare, but on the basis of human health considerations. And so I would say, when we look at the three core elements, it is animal welfare, it is human health, and it is ensuring that Canada follows through on this idea of being a leader on the world stage, and certainly following other international efforts.
Yeah, so it's multi-layered, and you've been talking about the One Health thing, basically since COVID began, and that this is the way to really be able to frame it in a more human-centric way, because us humans are very human-centric, and to be able to really hit home how interconnected we are, that they're not separate issues. So it's basically it's appealing to that human-centric part of us.
Well, and I think we want to, I think of this when I think of animal advocacy in Parliament, and incremental changes are frustrating. I recognize that, and single issue campaigns can be frustrating sometimes too, because we don't get at the bigger picture issues, say, of large scale industrial animal agriculture, which is horrifying for a volume of animals that is incomprehensible in comparison to something like fur farming, say. But it is another opportunity to emphasize two things. One, to emphasize this idea of a One Health approach, and to educate colleagues of mine and elected officials at all levels, but elected officials certainly in my world and in Parliament, about a One Health approach, what that means, and how we need to reduce pandemic risk. We can't reduce it entirely, but here are the key drivers of pandemic risk, and here's how we can reduce pandemic risk. That's really important. And two, I think it's another opportunity to just emphasize the science behind the fact that animals think, feel, and love. And so here's another, yes, it might be a single issue campaign, and it might be helping a small group of animals in one specific sector, but it is another opportunity to emphasize to colleagues the science behind animal sentience.
Yeah, and that is the thing, a lot of us say animal liberationists. We want, we don't, there's a lot of people who don't want single campaigns, but when it comes to politics, there's no other way to do it. We just can't do big sweeping changes. The law doesn't allow that. And so we have to get more strategic, and it's not always ideal, but we need to chip away at each level, kind of thing. So, Nate, with all of this converging all at the same time to make it the time for this issue and this bill, I mean, besides the fact that it's calling for it, there are also a lot of signs that this is the time that there are a lot of things moving in that direction. Some movement with BC, some movement internationally. Tell us a little bit about where fur farms and the fur in general, what's happening as far as the banning of that goes in other parts of the world.
Well, I think to your point earlier, just about how quickly people act when they see human health at risk. And in this case, we've seen certainly governments in Europe that have acted to, in some cases, call thousands of mink because of the human health risk and the pandemic risk and the mutation risk that these farms pose. You've seen efforts in BC, and you had the Chief Medical Officer's office in BC say this is a human health risk, and that's why we're taking action to phase out mink farming. And so there is a really credible international, but also domestic conversation happening in this space to say this is not only unnecessary, right? This is not connected to feeding people. This is connected to a frivolous fashion item and think of put that benefit, however you want to measure that benefit, I would say negligible, whatever you want to measure that benefit, as against the real risk to human lives. And medical experts have, someone mentioned Jan Hayek, but there's dozens of public health officials in Canada, let alone the many more around the world that have highlighted the risk here. And so this would be a pretty modest step towards a One Health approach, but an important one nonetheless.
And so I think mink farming bans have been just passed in the U.S. House, and there is also they've been passed in the U.K. I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. UK, Norway, Italy, Belgium. And then there's other places like Israel and the state of California that have banned the sale of fur altogether. And
that's not something we would be able to do at the federal. Sale is always provincial, but the interesting thing about farming, and this was a question very early on, because many of my colleagues will say, well, farming is regulated by provinces, and it's true, but there's actually shared jurisdiction here. So it is this is why you see BC able to phase out farming, fur farming and mink farming in their jurisdiction, but because there's shared jurisdiction, this could be federal legislation as well. And I would argue it should be federal legislation. And it's not so dissimilar to this. We have a platform commitment to prohibit the live export of horses for slaughter. We can talk about that, but that platform commitment is an important one, and it would impact the commercial benefit here to Canadian society if one cares about the positive economic impact. And some people will come back to animal advocates like me in Parliament and say, yes, but the economic benefit and the importance to industry. And look, these are tiny industries when you think of the live export of horses or commercial fur farming in Canada. And so when you look at any benefit that one wants to come back and say, well, what about this benefit and what about that? There's no I would say, important benefit at all when you compare it to the significant costs, both obviously in relation to animal lives, but also in relation to risk to human health.
And just for folks' information, Aaron put in a list of countries, global fur bans. So for everybody's interest in that, and just to be clear, the BC, so BC provincially, in the last few months has banned mink farms. Now, just before we move on from that, Nate, Michelle asked, why just the mink farms? Why would they, and is that just because that's what was in the news and that's what's top of mind for people because of COVID? What would have been the resistance to just doing a fur farm ban through the province, do you think?
It's a good question. I don't know all the details of the conversations that happened at the provincial level in BC, but I would say when I was looking at doing it at the federal level, I wasn't looking to be specific to mink or to fox, and I followed the UK example, which differentiates as between the practice of individual hunting and individual trapping as against farming and intensive farming. And so the bill and just to take a little bit of a step back, but you also saw Indigenous leaders in BC come out against fur farming, and they drew that same distinction. They said, we have our traditional Indigenous practices and we are here to protect those, but we are very much in support of banning commercial fur farming, which is not consistent with our traditional Indigenous practices. And so when I was looking at doing something at the federal level, I took those conversations and comments to heart, and I looked at what the UK did, and I squarely focused on fur farming, commercial fur farming, but it wasn't specific to one animal or another. It would apply to any commercial fur farming.
Mhm, mhm. And that's, I think it's really important, a piece that does come up a lot when anything around fur is being spoken about, it is the Indigenous issues around it. And so it is important for folks to know that the chiefs in BC, this organization did put their power behind the banning of the mink farms. So, this is a place we talk a lot about intersections with Indigenous communities. And this is one where I think a lot of we can really intersect across the country. There are a lot of Indigenous communities that are being screwed by fur farms, the water, the contamination of the water supply, wildlife sort of intermingling. There's all sorts of things. So something that we really need to keep in mind in this discussion. And so we were talking about, Nate, the financial, that these are such small industries in Canada, but also, from a financial point of view, I mean, fur is falling out of favor in the fashion industry. Some of the world's biggest brands have gone fur free, Gucci, Nordstrom, and Canada Goose. Did you ever think you'd see the day that Canada Goose would go fur free?
Well, it's a good point, and it's also a testament to the fact that even if you don't see legislative change, you can raise your voice and see social change. And so we are seeing the market shift in a significant way. I worry a little bit about overemphasizing only because I know nothing about fashion. Amy would be the first to say that, but I do know fashion comes and goes.
Yes,
And
true.
so it may well be in the decline now, and I don't know what the future holds for this particular fashion. I would hope it maintains a steady decline, but at the moment, at least, I've spoken to Tim Gunn on this, and I know the documentary emphasizes this point as well and speaks to folks in the fashion industry. But it's an important point to raise, and I think it's an important point when you also see how the changing way that we see how people are changing their habits with respect to their diets too, right? Like there is a generational change here, which I think is really makes me optimistic. But people are increasingly examining their fashion choices, their food choices, and their lifestyle choices, and saying, how do I make these choices consistent with my moral beliefs? And it's encouraging.
Mm. Now, just for those folks wondering, the documentary that Nate is talking about is the Real Fur documentary. We had Tamar, who is the director of that documentary, on here a couple of months ago, and Ina will drop a link in the chat so you know about that, because they have done a lot of work to champion this ban of fur farms. In fact, their campaign is called Make Fur Farms History. And I know you've been working a lot with them, Nate, on this. And so,
Yeah, I was just say a huge credit to, like, honestly, I can't emphasize enough, just I was working on other things. I've always cared about animal welfare issues, but when this was brought to my attention, I just sort of thought, yeah, I'll put a bill together. And then that I wasn't able to introduce it at the tail end of the last parliament because of the timing of the election. And so when we got back, I recently tabled it, and we can get into the arcane nature of private members' business and what comes next for it. But there's now an open. I have to figure out exactly how we move forward with it.
How to push it forward, and yeah, and so we'll get to that in a second. But one of the things I think you brought up that's so important for us to understand is, yes, there are trends. But law is the way we enshrine values, and once a law has been passed, it's very hard to go back, to backpedal on that. And whereas a corporation can backpedal very easily. So, so I think just for people to understand the importance of enshrining things in law.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's a reason that you need the law to step in at some point, where you have, and fur farming is a good example, the live export of horses is a good example, marine land is a good example. You still have a relatively small number of actors that are going to commit a serious amount of harm to animals and to the environment and to human health, potentially, and pose a serious risk. And these are externalities here, because what cost is there in the marketplace that accounts for harm to animals? There's none, right? And this is the challenge in some ways, that we see major harms and I would say major and horrible harms to animals as a cost of doing business. And so you do need the law to step in at some point and impose those values and say, no, it's not just the cost of doing business, and these rules will be in place consistent with our values to ensure that there's greater compassion and respect for animals, or to preserve human health in a more serious way.
The environment, all of
Exactly
these
right.
things
Yeah.
that are huge values to our survival. Bill is asking, sorry, Bob is asking about the bill. Does Bill C247 also call for the end to fur trapping?
It does not. So again, I modeled it on legislation from the UK, but also there are two things I would say to this. One is, I think you run into really difficult challenges around Indigenous rights on the one hand, but two, it's the same for the same reason when I look at my advocacy around changing the way we eat and operationalizing the food guide, and when I think about changing the laws around humane transport in commercial farming in Canada and industrial animal agriculture, when I look at the bigger picture of how do I make the biggest difference, trapping and or hunting don't impact the volume of animal, the sheer number of animals that we see with commercial farming. And so in this case, I think we make the biggest difference. We avoid some of the really obvious obstacles. It's consistent with some of the international legislation we've seen, and it also not only addresses animal welfare at scale in a way that I think trapping and hunting considerations wouldn't, but two, it also really encapsulates the health risk to humans, right? In a way that trapping and hunting, they don't pose the same. When you don't have animals congregated in these tightly confined, filthy conditions, there isn't the pandemic risk and the human health risk that we see to these commercial fur farming operations.
Yeah, it's lower hanging fruit. And again, with legislation, you have to go in increments. And as you said, you would get all sorts of blowback around the trapping because of the Indigenous.
It would be impossible. It would be
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yet, if we were able to sort of morph societal opinions around fur, I mean, gradually the demand for fur is just going to drop off, hopefully. So, I mean, knowing that the fur farms is such a low-hanging fruit, and in fact, there was a recent survey done across Canada that shows that 3 out of 4 Canadians oppose killing animals for their fur. So knowing that this is such a no-brainer, We still are expecting a lot of opposition, right, Nate? This is not like this bill has got a big uphill battle.
Well, we always see opposition in Parliament to animal welfare issues, regardless of what those animal bills actually seek to do, in part because of this conversation around a slippery slope and thin edge of the wedge. And if this, then what? And you see it all the time from sort of the meat and hunting lobbyists on the Hill, that these issues they see as sort of existential, that yes, it might be protecting animals in captivity today, but it's taking away my business tomorrow. And so they don't want people to change the way they think about animals, because there is that existential threat. And so they put a lot of time and energy. And I saw it firsthand in early 2016, where you had the Chicken Farmers of Canada bragging that they lobbied over 80 parliamentarians against a piece of legislation that wouldn't have impacted them at all. And so, and not just them, right? Like, I run down the list of organizations that were lobbying, and so, and spreading misinformation. So this
Debbie
isn't,
calls them the slippery slopers.
yeah, but that's nothing new under the sun, right?
Mhm.
Like, you're going to get that every single time. And so you have to be prepared to argue it on the merits of that particular issue at that particular time, and win the argument. And in this case, you see a majority of Canadians support it. You see human, you see epidemiologists and infectious disease experts calling attention to the need to do this. You see animal science experts calling attention to the need to do this, and you can point to international efforts. So I think will there be opposition to this issue? Yes. What was there opposition to addressing the live export of horses and protecting animals in captivity, and to banning testing on animals? Yes, and yes, right? But we were able to get those things on the platform. So the fact there is some opposition, I don't think should discourage us in any way. And it just is all the more reason to work hard to make sure we raise our voices and educate parliamentarians about why this needs to get done right now.
So let's talk about how this bill works, okay? Because you mentioned private members bill, and Mo freaked out and said, not freaked out, but Mo was surprised and said, "Oh, is Nate no longer with the Liberal Party? That's not what private members bills." So this isn't a private members bill, and explain what this bill is and how what we would need to garner as far as support goes to move forward with it.
Okay, so private members business is a very arcane process. So I can introduce an unlimited number of private members business, and I can do it as a liberal. I can do it at, I have colleagues from the NDP and colleagues from the Conservative Party that introduce multiple bills. The only government, so cabinet ministers and parliamentary secretaries, are unable to introduce legislation. Everyone else is a private member like me, and we can introduce an unlimited number of bills and motions. But uh, okay, well, first, let's say that's really important, and it's important to have that legislation drafted, to table it, to garner in some ways, knock something into the news cycle, and stimulate a public conversation around global vaccine equity. Recently, I had a motion, and I knew that motion wasn't going to get debated and voted upon, but it was a way to push it into the media at a particular time and to generate some news around it and some attention to it, knowing that we were going to have a conversation heading into the budget. So you can use private members business, even if it's never going to be debated and voted on, to start a conversation. And that in and of itself can be critically important. And it can be something that people rally around. And like we're having this conversation, there's a piece of legislation you can talk to a member of parliament about, you can talk to one of my colleagues about, and you can educate them and say, this is really important to me. Can you go off and support this? So that in and of itself, there's value to that. But in this arcane process that is private members business, there's also a lottery system. As bizarre as that sounds, there's a lottery system. And so at the beginning of every parliament, everyone who is not a minister and everyone who's not a parliamentary secretary, they get to be put on this list, and their names pulled out of a box or a hat or whatever, what have you. And so 280 something, almost 300 people will get their names that are set out in order. And if you are the first 30, it's called the order of precedence. You get debated and voted on first. And it's quite a silly system where you get 1 hour of debate, and then you wait, you have to work through the list of 30. So 30 days later, you get a second hour of debate, then there's a vote, and you get to decide at second reading whether the bill goes to committee. And Parliament gets to vote and decide that. And so, and then it comes back from committee after being studied at committee, and then you go through that cycle again, 1 hour, 30 days, another hour, and then hopefully it passes at third reading and gets kicked to the Senate, and the Senate goes through that same process. Now, I am not in the top 30. So when I was elected in 2015 and I won the lottery of sorts, I was in the top 30. So I introduced that bill and C246 did not pass its second reading, but it was debated and it was voted upon. I won the private members bill lottery in the last session as well. And so far as I was in the top 30, I did a drug policy bill, and that bill debate had begun, and then COVID hit. And that actually was a very successful piece of legislation. It didn't pass, but it became part of government legislation. So the government
Amazing.
tabled the criminal justice bill that incorporated the bill I drafted. So it can bills can have a huge impact in that way too. Even if they don't pass, they can become government legislation too. In this case, as of this session, I am number 41 or 42. So I'm not in the top 30. So I don't get it in this spring session to be debated and voted upon. But I'm probably going to make a decision. It might be in June, it might be in September, I'm not entirely sure, where then there's a replenishment. And so once we're done with 15 of the 30 and they've been dealt with, another 15 get added. So I'll be part of that first replenishment. And then I will have to decide what bill I'm going to move forward to have debated and voted upon. And this one is obviously the only one I've tabled so far. So this would be the one that at the moment I would be moving forward with. I am thinking through another bill that more clearly emphasizes a One Health approach, which would be effectively a bill focused on pandemic prevention and preparedness that calls on the government to take a One Health approach. It will call attention to fur farming, but it won't just be about fur farming. It'll be a much broader bill about pandemic prevention and preparedness, and call on the government to do everything it can to reduce pandemic risk and to follow through more seriously across government departments this idea of a One Health approach. So I'm still working through I don't have that bill drafted, so I'm still working through the details. But
would you like massages? What do we have to do to get you to decide to pick up the fur bill on this one? I mean, the One Health bill is great.
My hope would be that we would, if I land the second bill right, my hope would be that it would still touch on this issue and would still force the government to act on this particular issue. So my hope is I can kind of do this and more. But as of if I were to have to decide tomorrow, then it would certainly be this bill. And look, it may. The other thing that I'm thinking through right now is we promised in the last election, just so people are familiar with it, to introduce legislation to ban cosmetic testing on animals as soon as 2023. We promised to work with partners to curb the illegal wildlife trade, but also to end elephant and rhinoceros tusk trade in Canada. We promised to introduce legislation to protect animals in captivity, which I understood to be a nod to the Jane Goodall Act. And we promised to ban the live export of horses for slaughter. These four, we also promised to work with partners to help women and children fleeing violence stay united with their companion animals, but that won't be legislative. So these other four pieces, all of these are in mandate commitments for the government. I also want to assess, and I'm actively engaged with ministers' offices, I need to assess where is the government at in realizing these commitments? And if they're not in a serious place or a place where I want them to be by the time I'm tabling something and moving forward with something, can I do something akin to C246, where I would roll a number of measures that the government's already committed to, so I know it will pass, into a bill, and then possibly add something else like this that also would have government support. So I'm trying to think a little bit creatively about how do I do as much as I can with the one shot that I've got. But at the moment, this is my one shot that I've got as tabled at the moment.
I love all of these, and I love how strategic you're getting. So I think, what we need to sort of understand, for those of us who want to lobby this bill right now is so there's this possibility, but also, is there a possibility, Nate, that if there is just enough sort of people meeting with MPs and having great meetings, especially with, say, the Liberals and the NDP, who are more likely to champion this bill, that this could become a Liberal-backed bill? Is there any way that that happens?
In the short term, probably not, only because of the time in the House is so limited. And so that's why I even say when I look at the government promises, I want to assess how far they've moved along and how they plan to implement them, because it may be that, yes, we've committed to protect animals in captivity through legislation, but if that's priority number 30 for the government on a total list of legislative priorities, maybe I don't see that fast enough for that to become law. So I'm going to take it in my own hands to make it become law. And so the idea that they would, after an election with this huge set of commitments already and this huge number of mandate commitments, the idea that they would pick up something new in this parliament, I think is probably not likely to occur. And so the way we see this bill become law would be two things functionally, I would say. One is in this parliament, if I were to move forward with it, that would be the best opportunity to rally around that. Even if I don't move forward with it, though, I think right now, because it is a bill tabled in Parliament, it absolutely is valuable to reach out to members of Parliament, to educate them about it, and to solicit their support and confirm their support. And as we have a growing number of people who have committed their support from all parties, frankly, and I would say you're going to get more support probably from Liberal colleagues and NDP colleagues if I'm just looking practically at it, but there are conservatives who unquestionably care about these issues. I just met with Marilyn Gladu as an example. She had sponsored the bill to ban cosmetic testing in the House. I've worked with Michelle Rempel closely on animal welfare issues in the past. I know there are conservatives who care about these issues too. So meet with your member of Parliament, engage them on this, and gauge their support for this. Get some confirmation about support, and then we can start to really look at how we advance this issue through this Parliament in particular. But also, let's keep in mind we've got 5 promises in this last platform on animal issues, and so first priority for the Liberal Animal Welfare Caucus, at least, is like, let's make sure those 5 commitments are realized and implemented. And what a bill like this hopefully does, and what support and advocacy hopefully does right now around a new issue, would be to say, we're going to set down a marker for what is going to come next.
And so, yeah, I mean, if there is enough movement, and we saw this when just when they were trying to bring in the federal ag gag law. I mean, we had a really nice, strong contingent of AJAers that were able to meet with particularly NDP MPs, because the Liberals were already championing, or were already opposing it, the ag gag law. And it made a huge difference. I mean, they went back to the agriculture critic. He introduced a new amendment that made the bill no longer appealing to the conservatives. I mean, it wasn't a lot of people going out and meeting. I'm not saying it was just AJ, but there were.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah. It makes. Don't undersell the
Mhm.
difference that meeting with someone makes, especially if the tact you take is to sit down and educate them on the issue. We have too many issues before us to be expert in everything.
Mhm.
I'm probably expert in nothing. And so if you come to me and you sit down with me and you walk me through a particular issue in detail, and I guarantee that those outside of BC, because I think BC MPs are likely to have at least seen the conversation in their own backyard, but I guarantee there are many of my colleagues who have no idea what the connection is between commercial fur farming and infectious disease risk. I guarantee it. And I guarantee if you sit down and educate them about it, it will open their eyes.
Mm. And so, and one other thing that we're going to sort of focus on in our AJA action around this, Nate, is also to reach out to some senators, because that's the other alternative, is that sometimes when there's a bill on the House level that has some steam, but you can't go forward with it, a senator will champion it in the Senate, and that can move a lot faster. Am I correct in that?
100% right. And actually, if you can get a senator to pick up a bill like this, that would be amazing, because again, and this is one reason I got the bill drafted, is because then you have something you can shop around to others and say, can you pick this idea up? You don't have to do a ton of work. You just have to put your name behind this. Here it is. And so we've seen great leadership out of the Senate. We've seen leadership from conservative senators who pushed for cosmetic testing. We saw great leadership from Murray Sinclair when he was in the Senate around the Jane Goodall Act. And senators, there's a lot of support for animal welfare issues in the Senate. And so there's a lot of value in reaching out to senators and building up an even greater coalition in that chamber. There's no question about it.
So I just want to give people a little overview of our action. Ina is going to drop the AJA action brief in the chat. We also have it in the Facebook group, and I have sent it out in our morning's email. But basically, folks, we are going to focus on, first of all, contacting your MP, and especially if you have a Liberal, NDP, or Green MP or Bloc. And I know that we've had a lot of folks get very discouraged by their conservative MPs. Nate says, still give it a go, still try to reach out to them. And also, but if you have had experience with the conservative MP and they're just like, no, don't give me any animal issues, you will be the ones that will be directed to choose a provincial senator to reach out to. Yes, a lot of people don't realize that you can write your provincial senator. You may not get a meeting with them, but you can always request it. And so we've got all of the information in that action brief. We're going to ask people, no matter if you are planning on meeting with you want to meet with your political rep or not, at least send the email, at least make the phone call with the talking points, okay? Just to make it top of mind for your political rep. And then for those of you that are willing to go a little further for this issue, we want you to put in that phone call or that email that you would like, you requesting a meeting to be able to discuss this issue further. We've outlined everything in the AJA action brief. You should, just follow it. And again, you're going to put everything in your own words. You're going to approach this if you have your own sort of personal experience with this issue. You want to sort of bring that into things. But we wanted to give you all of the basics on that. So Nate, for those of, there are a lot of AJAers who have met with their political reps in the last year for the first time and have had really positive experiences. There are some people that are scared shitless to meet with their political reps. Do you have any words of advice for them?
Yeah, so two things I would say. One, if you have never met with your member of parliament, then it is 100% worth meeting with your member of parliament. And if you already met with, whether it's conservative, liberal, or what, if you already met with the member of parliament and they were entirely dismissive, maybe you're going to expend your efforts elsewhere. But if you haven't met with them yet, reach out and meet with them. Everyone wants to do what's right for their constituents, and it's really important in a few different ways. It's really important that Animal Justice is helping to convene these meetings and helping you and with the reach out, but you are the constituent. You are the one that they are going to respond to, and they are going to listen to, and they're going to want to hear from. And all the better if you've got neighbors or friends in the community you can reach out as a group, because I can tell you, and Zoom makes this much easier, but I meet on any number of occasions with a group of say 5 to 10 constituents on different issues. And it does matter knowing, okay, this is not just one person, this is a group of people who care about this. The other thing I would say is think of it as a process, right? This isn't just I've done this one thing and I've done my job. Okay, this is think of yourself as an educator. So you're going to come to me and you're going to explain and you're going to educate me about this issue, and then you're going to come back to me 6 months from now or a year from now, and you're going to check in with me, or you're going to say, I really care about animal issues. There's actually a bill before Parliament right now that I really care about, and it's to end fur farming, and I want to. Here's why I care about it. Here's the evidence behind it. Take some time to think about it, but is it okay if I follow up with your staff and figure out where you're at with it a couple of weeks from now once you've had time to think about it, and then follow up and build relationships with not only the member of parliament, so they know who you are, they know where you are in the community, they know what you do in the community, but also build relationships with the staff when you follow up. And that, I think that really is, when you see them out in the community, they'll say hi, you just build that relationship. If it happens to be a party that you support, all the better. You can join a riding association, you get more actively involved, but that they see you and they know you and they become, you build a bridge and you build that relationship. I think it is crucially important. And even if you want to just take the one meeting and you don't want to do all that extra effort, take another meeting a year from then, or when there's an active issue on animals before the House, and you can say, oh yeah, remember the last time I engaged with you with my neighbors around fur farming, but there's another bill that's going to come up around cosmetic testing on animals, and I'm asking you for your support on that too. And my own view, and I hope this holds true, especially around issues that are going to come through in this session, it does really create a really important opportunity to reinforce positive actions that members of parliament are going to be undertaking, right? So cosmetic testing is a good example, or protecting animals in captivity is a good example. These are promises we've made, and you're also at different moments throughout this parliament, you can reach out and you can say, thank you. Thank you for standing up for animals. It's really important to me that you've done this. And then when you go back and you say, and oh, by the way, there's this new issue and it's also on animals, and thanks so much for doing what you did. Can you do it again? It's habit forming, I think, for MPs to then say, oh, right, I did that. I advocated around animals. I made a difference on animals. I'm going to go off and I'm going to do that again.
Fireweed is asking, this is a really great question. Is it always advantageous to engage with elected representatives as a delegation? So more than one person.
Is it always? I don't know if it's always, but I would say, and look, it depends how the delegation conducts itself in some ways, right? If you have one person who's really effective as an advocate, as an educator, but because you've got 10 people on the call and everyone wants the opportunity to chip in, then maybe it's less effective perhaps than a group of 2 or 3, and that one really effective persuader does most of the work. So I don't know that it's always, but I would say, yeah, there's value in numbers, and there's certainly value in here are the 5 to 10 of us from your community, and here's who I am in the community, here's who Kimberly is in the community, and here's what we do in the community, and here's why we care about the issue. And okay, here's Debbie, and she's going to talk about this particular issue that's before us right now, and then the rest of you sit back and let Debbie do her job, right? So I think but functionally, like, there's value in numbers. It's the same reason email campaigns matter. And so, it doesn't mean nothing when I get a set of form emails. It does matter, but it matters because if I receive 5 form emails, okay, that's all right. If I receive 150 form emails, then I really notice. But it's the personal letters and personal, really, emails. Emails are better than letters, but it's personal emails that matter more than the form emails. But it's also the in-person interactions that matter more than the personal emails even. And when you have a group of people meeting and you can see that this really matters to a growing number of your constituents, I think it does make a bigger difference.
But you're right, there is something to be said for having and establishing a one-on-one relationship with your MP too, so that they know who you are. You can drop them a line once in a while. I mean, not all MPs will be open to that, but some definitely are. We've seen that definitely with a lot of AJAers.
And handwritten letters. So I saw a couple handwritten letters to me, but this is an age bias. Handwritten letters to me are the same as personal emails, but to a number of my colleagues, handwritten letters mean even more. Where I would draw the distinction is when kids write. When kids write, and I've got one constituent, Sandy, and her kids. They're the best.
Oh yeah, Sandy, you and
amazing. They are the best. Like the drawings that the letters that I have the letters up I literally put them up in my office because they're so good. And so when classrooms write, when there are ways of thinking about this issue, because when I go pre-pandemic, but when I would go into classrooms and I would talk to grade 5 and 6 classes, animal welfare issues came up a lot. And so I would encourage, when you think about this, there are your kids, there are lots of people who care about these issues. And I'm raising my kids vegan. I mean, we raise our kids with the same values that we have. And so there are other ways of engaging our kids in this as well, and engaging to say, I'm going to show you the political process, and do you want to be involved in the political process? And Sandy, as a constituent, has been really effective at that, and her kids are incredible. Her kids, I think, have done more than many of my constituents at just having the impact that can be had in writing those personal handwritten letters.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. Yeah, Sandy and her kids were just in our AJA Lunchtime Live 2 weeks ago. Okay, so Nate, there's a few questions that I want to rapid fire at you around this process. I guess we're not going to get to talk about anything outside of the fur bill today, so we're going to have you on again sometime soon, because there's lots of other burning questions. So first of all, for those that are wanting to meet with your political rep, just FYI, we can always give you some coaching in AJA around that. We've done that in the past. We also have Gabriel Wilgen's module in the Animal Justice Academy. Yeah, Ina just put that in there. It's a really great one to look at. Now, we're sort of focusing in on the senator's idea. And by the way, I just want to say the classroom idea of getting classrooms to write some sort of classroom campaign, I hope somebody just picked that up and is going to run with that. Okay, I hope an organizer has just made a mental note of that and going to run with it. I just wrote it down. So if we were going to go sort of target senators to reach out to them, Nate, are there, first of all, we focus on the province that the senator is in. It should be somebody in our province. But then I know that there's all sorts of different groups of senators, the progressive senators and everything. Is there, if somebody's looking at, say, 3 senators from their province, is there an affiliation that they might look to that would be more noteworthy to reach out to?
I'm honestly not certain, and I don't know the best way of navigating that particular process, other than to say, reach out to and see what the response is like. And also, the only thing I would say too is some people get quite their backs up if it's not the senator or not the MP themselves that they might meet for the first time. Don't get your back up, right? Like, this is if you want to build a relationship, you're building a relationship with the office. And at some point you might insist upon that meeting with the MP and senator, but initially just building bridges and building relationships. And so senators' offices in particular, their staff are wonderful. And it may be that you meet with their staff first. You might meet with the senator first, but it may be that you meet with their staff first, and just know that that is okay. That is how we build these bridges.
Yeah, not just okay. I mean, staffers are behind a lot of bills that get,
Exactly.
introduced. Yeah,
Exactly.
so never underestimate that. So let me see here. Another thing that I think is important for people to know when they're thinking about meeting. I mean, now is so much more low pressure doing it on Zoom than going into an office, right? Like that's something everybody's still doing their meetings via Zoom, right?
It's not even more low pressure, which it is,
Yeah.
but it also means you can add an expert that might not be close by. I just
Mhm.
had a meeting on a healthcare related issue, and I met with an advocacy organization that is national in their leadership. But I also met with a constituent. And the reason I met with the organization is because of the constituent. But you know who did most of the talking? Those who were involved in the advocacy organization. And it was a really, I think, useful tip where it was the constituent was the foot in the door and was the person who I was really interested in meeting Ashley. And then I also met with Kate and the team at the National Advocacy Organization, and they presented most of the case for taking the action that they wanted me to take. But the constituent was there to explain their personal story, how this issue impacted them in a really personal way. And I thought it was a really it was really well done. And I would say that that is a very good model for how to do reach out on Zoom, because you can always pull in, and if you have a connection with one of the infectious disease experts or the animal science experts and you want to make a really big impact, well, you can do that on Zoom much more easily than in person.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And someone else was. I know we have to let you go in a couple of minutes, so I just wanted, a couple of people have been talking about, well, their MPs haven't gone back to them. They've tried them several times. In a case like that, Nate, do you just sort of cut your losses and try to go through, try to do your advocacy through a different political channel?
You can absolutely do that. You can also, if you really wanted to be insistent, you could make it a game of numbers, and you could have a number of people write in, your friends and neighbors in the community, and say, no, just so you know, maybe something fell through the cracks. Maybe you had some turnover with your staff. There are actually a number of us that would be interested in meeting with someone on your team. And so this is just so you know, like, this is our last follow up, but it is a follow up that matters a lot to us. So I hope you take it seriously. You could do one follow up like that, but yeah, at some point you may want to cut your losses and may want to help organize with others. And this is a campaign. If you want to think of it like a campaign, you're not going to get a yes from everybody, but you need enough yeses. And so you've got your spreadsheet of members of parliament in the House of Commons, and some become X's and some become checks, and you keep at it until you filled out your board sufficiently to go off and win the campaign.
Yeah, and keep looking in our AJA action brief, folks. I'm going to update it after this with some new information. We're also going to have a document where you can note who you're, talking to around a meeting. If there's any collaborations that you might want to have, or you want some help, we'll just have a main document to kind of follow that. And one last question, Nate, because you are also very involved in the Animal Welfare Caucus, and I have heard a lot of people ask this. Kathy's asking it. Prior to the election, I asked my MP if re-elected, would he join the Animal Welfare Caucus? He said that he would. Other than calling and asking if he joined, which I think you should be able to do that, is there a way for me to research members to see if he actually joined? So a bigger question, Nate, is this another form of animal advocacy that we could do when talking to our MPs to encourage them to become part of the, consider becoming part of the Animal Caucus, Welfare Caucus?
Unquestionably, yes. And membership, I don't want to push back too much on this, hold them accountable for this idea of membership, because membership can mean a couple of different things. So I would absolutely encourage you to incorporate that into your conversations with MPs and colleagues, and say, can you please, when you see the invitations, work with, you can use my name, you can say, work with Nate, work with Julie DeBruzen, work with Arif Farani, work with Goody Hutchings. There's a number of work with Leah Taylor Roy, work with Pam DeMoff. There are a number of colleagues who are great on this, right? Marie France Lalonde, Alexandra Mendez is amazing. She was one of the founding members. So there are amazing colleagues who are working on these things. And so definitely reach out and encourage people to join us. And it's helpful because even if they don't join a meeting, when we got these issues into the platform, it was because we put a letter together and it was signed by dozens of Liberal MPs. And when I look at those dozens of Liberal MPs, do they show up to every meeting? No. Do some of them show up to any meetings? No. but were they willing to put their name to something to push it into the platform? Yes. And so you calling for participation on your behalf can matter a huge amount when push comes to shove.
Amazing. Nate, oh God, I had so many questions for you, but like I said, I mean, okay, you know what? One that is really pressing that people are wanting to know that's not on this issue is the Liberal government on the live horse export issue. Do you have any inside scoop on when that could actually go forward?
Well, it needs to happen sooner than later, and we don't have to wait for legislation for it to happen. I got Library of Parliament to do some research for me recently to show the path via regulation, and it's very straightforward to do it via regulation. I have followed up with the Agricultural Minister's office and intend to do so again. We have not seen. There's been a lot going on, in fairness, right?
Yeah, there has.
You know, it has
Yeah.
been very busy in Ottawa between the pandemic, between what we've just seen with the protests and the Emergencies Act, and there's now war in Ukraine, and on and on. There's always, you know, there are major issues of national, international concern that the government is seized with, but the agricultural minister does need to move more quickly on this. And so I would encourage you to also reach out to the agricultural minister. If you're reaching out to your MP on fur farming, do ask these questions too. I mean, pull up the platform, protecting animals, and the 5 commitments we made, and say, as you, not only can you please support this bill, but can you follow up on these issues to make sure they happen as quickly as possible and they're implemented and realized as quickly as possible? That I'm so thankful that these commitments were made, but now we've got to realize and implement them, and that matters most. And so on timeline, I wish I had a timeline, but you know, the answer is it needs to happen yesterday. It needs to happen as quickly as possible, and it can through regulation. So when I do have an answer, I will send you a note, Kimberly, and then you can inform the folks at AJA the next meeting whether I'm here or not.
Okay, that sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Nate. I'm going to take me and you off Spotlight so you can see all of your supporters because, and if you go to the right-hand corner, go to gallery view, Nate, so you can see everybody. We had over 100 people between here and Facebook Live for this hour, and just some of the comments. Debbie said, Nate, could you please extend your writing to include Winnipeg Center? Eleanor said, you are our inspiration of hope. Andrea said, thank you so much for your work, Nate. This conversation made my day. It's given people a lot of hope, Nate, and we are going to work like hell to push this bill forward in a really constructive and deliberate way, and we'll keep you posted on it. Okay.
I appreciate it. And look, like, none of this happens but for Canadians standing up and caring about these issues. And so thank you everyone who's joined, and everyone for all of the efforts that you put in to make this an issue that is before Parliament, that is in election platforms, and that will continue to be advanced going forward as quickly as we can. So yeah, just a sincere thanks to everyone here.
Yeah, and we do have some fur OGs on this, here with Jenny McQueen. Ina's been doing so much amazing work. So many people doing amazing work on this issue for years. And also the organizations, fur bearers. Let's not forget the fur bearers. Also the Make Fur Farms History group has been doing amazing things. So folks, we're not the only game in town. Lots of people doing a lot of great things, but we do have a great action brief, and we can support you in meeting up with your MPs. So folks, AJers, let's give Nate a big AJ thank you for all of your work and for giving us this hour of your time during a very pressing time in Canadian politics. Nate, thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Okay, everyone, have a great week. Take care of yourselves.